We are here discussing with psychiatrist Dr. McMahon. Dr. McMahon, I would like to ask, your field of research right now is again in the genetic component. Could you give us more specific examples of the data of relative suffering from mood disorders and anxiety in the offspring or grandchildren to help our audience know, to get a feel for what the genetic expression is like?
Certainly. What we have known for a while in the field of psychiatric genetics is that disorders like depression and anxiety do tend to run in families. Now, the numbers depend in part on what disorder we're talking about, but let's look, for example, at bipolar disorder. Someone who has a close relative with bipolar disorder, and by close relative I mean a parent, a brother, sister, will be at about a tenfold increased risk of developing bipolar disorder themselves. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone with a close relative with bipolar disorder will develop the illness themselves. In fact, about 90% of the time, people will not develop the illness or won't develop it to the same degree. In the case of anxiety disorders, the family risks are weaker but still recognizable. Having a close relative with an anxiety disorder will probably increase your own risk perhaps 2- or 3-fold. So we know that anxiety disorders are somewhat less genetic than illnesses like bipolar disorder. Clinical depression has an even smaller genetic component, perhaps a 2-fold or 3-fold increased risk when a close relative has the illness. And many people who experience clinical depression develop it without having anyone else in their family who had the illness. Now, we've known all of this for quite a while in the field. The real development in the last 10 years or so is we've begun to understand specifically which genes are involved. And thanks to new genetic technologies which arose out of projects like the Human Genome Project, it's now possible for us to use molecular markers, so-called genetic markers, that are spread across all of the chromosomes, and test which genes might be more frequent in people who have depression, anxiety, or bipolar disorder, and which are less frequent. And this approach has really proved to be very effective in identifying genetic risk factors for these illnesses. In the case of bipolar disorder, we've probably identified between 20 and 25 such risk factors. In the case of schizophrenia, it's actually more than 100. We've been less successful so far in identifying the genetic risk factors, the specific genetic risk factors for anxiety disorders. That's largely because we haven't yet done the large-scale studies that are necessary to make these gene identifications robust and reproducible up to the highest scientific standards. But we expect that in the next decade or so, this will happen for anxiety disorders as well.